What does it feel like to be told you don't belong right after risking your life for the country you love? On a crisp October morning, Lieutenant Maya Carter stepped onto a Delta flight from Atlanta to Chicago, her military uniform crisp and her heart heavy with the weight of a year-long deployment in the Middle East. At 28, Maya was a black woman who had seen the worst of war storms, gunfire, and the haunting silence of nights spent on high alert. Yet, nothing prepared her for the battle she'd face at 30,000 feet. In the plush confines of first class, where a single prejudiced glance would strip her of the dignity she'd fought so hard to earn. What if the seat you earned came with a price you never expected to pay? Meet Maya Carter, a 28-year-old soldier humiliated on a flight home told she didn't belong, just because of her skin. But her courage turned pain into a movement for justice, inspiring millions. Stick around to witness her incredible journey, and if it moves you, like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that matter. Maya's boots made a soft thud against the cabin floor as she navigated the narrow aisle, her posture a testament to years of discipline. She wasn't here to make a statement. All she wanted was to sink into her seat, close her eyes, and let the exhaustion of the past year melt away. Her father, Colonel James Carter, had surprised her with a first-class ticket, a rare gesture from a man of few words but deep pride. "You've earned this, Maya," he'd said over the phone, his voice steady but warm. "Come home in style." Those words had wrapped around her like a hug, a quiet affirmation of her sacrifices. So, when she found seat 4 by window seat with extra legroom, she allowed herself a small smile, folding her uniform jacket with care and stowing her worn backpack beneath the seat in front. The cabin buzzed with the usual pre-flight hum, the clink of champagne glasses, the rustle of newspapers, the soft chatter of passengers settling in. A few glanced her way, some with fleeting curiosity, others with polite nods, but Maya didn't mind. She leaned back, her eyes fluttering shut, and for a moment, she let herself dream of Chicago's skyline, of her mother's warm embrace, of a hot meal that didn't come from a rations pack. That peace, however, was short-lived. Laura Bennett, a tall, sharp-featured flight attendant with a tight bun and an even tighter smile, made her way down the aisle, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Her name tag gleamed under the cabin lights, but her eyes held a coldness that Maya didn't notice until it was too late. Laura stopped beside her, her gaze flicking from Maya's face to the seat number, then lingering on the military uniform with a scrutiny that felt like a physical weight. "Excuse me, ma'am," Laura said, her tone clipped, the kind of politeness that masked something uglier. "May I see your boarding pass?" Maya's eyes opened slowly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She nodded, reaching into her pocket with steady hands, and handed over the pass. Laura took it, her lips twitching as she scanned the details. "This is a first-class seat," she said, her voice low but pointed, as if stating the obvious was an accusation. "Yes," Maya replied calmly, her voice soft but firm. "That's what my ticket says." Laura's smile faded, replaced by a thin line of disapproval. "Are you traveling alone?" she asked, her tone now laced with suspicion. Maya nodded once, her brow furrowing slightly. The attendant held the pass a moment longer, as if expecting it to change, then handed it back with a sigh. "I'm afraid there's been a mix-up," she said, leaning in closer, her voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "This section is reserved for PIM customers." Confusion washed over Maya, followed by a slow, sinking dread. "This is the seat I was assigned," she said, her words measured, though her heart began to race. "It's the right one." Laura didn't budge. Instead, she straightened, her authoritative tone cutting through the hum of the cabin. "I'm asking you to move to the back, ma'am. You may have received this ticket by mistake, or perhaps someone gave it to you. Either way, I need to resolve this before takeoff." She reached out, her hand landing on Maya's shoulder. Not a shove, but a firm nudge, enough to make Maya freeze. The contact sent a jolt through her, a mix of shock and shame that burned hotter than any desert sun she'd endured. Heads turned. A businessman in 3C glanced up from his laptop, then quickly looked away. A woman sipping champagne in 5A whispered something to her companion, their eyes darting toward Maya before returning to their drinks. The cabin fell silent, the kind of silence that screamed louder than words. No one spoke up. No one questioned Laura's actions. Maya's throat tightened, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered her belongings. She didn't argue she couldn't find the words. Instead, she stood, her posture still proud, and made her way to the back of the plane, each step heavier than the last. In economy, she found an empty seat near the rear, the space cramped and the air stale. She sat down, her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on the seat in front of her. The downgrade wasn't the worst part. It was the way it happened. The way Laura had looked at her, like she was an imposter, an outsider who dared to step into a space she didn't belong. Maya's fingers brushed against the dog tags beneath her uniform, a reminder of the battles she'd fought, the lives she'd saved. Yet here, on a flight home, she felt smaller than ever, her pride wounded by a stranger's snap judgment. As the plane's engines roared to life, Maya's heart ached with a quiet fury. She wasn't just a soldier, she was a daughter, a sister, a woman who had earned her place. But in that moment, under Laura's cold gaze, she felt like none of that mattered. The sting of humiliation lingered, sharp and unyielding, as the plane taxied down the runway, carrying her towards Chicago and a reckoning she didn't yet know was coming. The roar of the engines couldn't drown out the quiet storm brewing in Maya Carter's chest as she sat in the cramped economy seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The humiliation from Laura Bennett's actions still stung, a sharp, invisible wound that cut deeper than any battlefield scar. At 28, Maya had faced insurgents, navigated hostile terrains, and led her unit through chaos with unyielding composure. But this moment of being reduced to an outsider on a flight home, in front of strangers who wouldn't meet her, gaze felt like a betrayal of everything she'd fought for. Her fingers brushed against the dog tags beneath her uniform, a grounding reminder of her worth. But the ache in her heart refused to ease. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a woman who deserved respect, a daughter coming home to her family. Yet, in that moment, all she felt was the weight of being unseen. Maya stared at the worn fabric of the seat in front of her jaw tight, her breathing steady but deliberate. She replayed Laura's words in her mind. This section is reserved for premium customers, each syllable a dagger that twisted deeper with every recollection. The memory of Laura's hand on her shoulder, that firm nudge that carried the weight of judgment, made her skin prickle with a mix of anger and shame. She hadn't argued, hadn't raised her voice. Years in the military had taught her to pick her battles, and this one, she thought, wasn't worth the fight. But as the plane climbed higher into the sky, the injustice settled into her bones, heavy and unyielding. She couldn't let this go, not for herself, not for the countless others who had been silently dismissed in the same way. With a steady hand, Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the raw emotion she'd been holding back. She opened her messages and typed a brief note to her father, Colonel James Carter, her words measured but laced with quiet hurt. They made me move to economy, Dad. Said I didn't belong in first class. She touched my shoulder to make me go. I'm okay, but I'm not okay. She hit send, then set the phone face down on her lap, her eyes drifting to the tiny window beside her. The clouds outside were a soft white, a stark contrast to the storm inside her. She didn't expect a reply right away. Her father was a busy man, a retired colonel now advising on aviation security for the Department of Transportation, but she knew he'd understand the weight of her words. Back in first class, Laura Bennett moved through the cabin with a practiced smile, pouring drinks and exchanging pleasantries as if nothing had happened. Her confidence, however, masked a flicker of unease. She'd done this before moved passengers she deemed out of place and no one had ever pushed back. But something about Maya's calm demeanor, the way she'd stood with such dignity despite the humiliation, lingered in Laura's mind like an unwelcome guest. Near the galley, another flight attendant, a younger woman named Sarah, approached her cautiously. Was there really an issue with her ticket? Sarah asked, her voice low, her eyes darting toward the back of the plane. Laura didn't look up, adjusting a tray with deliberate precision. She didn't look like she belonged there, she replied coolly. You know how it is sometimes people use uniforms to get sympathy upgrades. I wasn't taking any chances. Sarah shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, her silence a quiet disapproval that Laura chose to ignore. Maya's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced down to see a reply from her father. short and sharp, a tone she recognized all too well. What? Tell me everything. Her heart thudded as she typed out the details, her fingers moving quickly, her words raw but controlled. She saw my uniform, asked for my ticket. I showed it, but she insisted I move, said it was for premium customers. She touched my shoulder not hard, but enough to make her point. No one said anything. She sent the message, then leaned her head against the window, the cool glass, a small comfort against the heat of her emotions. A moment later, another text arrived. Flight number? Maya's breath caught. She knew that Toner father wasn't just asking for information. Colonel James Carter was a man who moved mountains with quiet precision, and when he asked for details, it meant something big was about to unfold. She sent the number, then set her phone aside, her mind racing, but her body still. In the cockpit, Captain Daniel Hayes was running through his pre-flight checklist when the in-flight phone buzzed beside him. He answered, expecting a routine update, but the voice on the other end was anything but routine. "This is Colonel James Carter," the voice said, authoritative and unyielding. "I'm calling about a passenger on your flight, Lieutenant Maya Carter, my daughter. She was removed from her first-class seat, humiliated in front of others, and physically touched without cause." Captain Hayes straightened, his pulse quickening. "Sir, I wasn't aware," he began. But James cut him off. "I've already contacted the Department of Aviation Security. You'll hear from them soon. I suggest you speak to your lead flight attendant and get the facts straight." The line went dead, leaving Hayes staring at the controls, the gravity of the situation sinking in like a lead weight. He pressed the cabin intercom button, his voice steady but firm. "Laura Bennett, report to the cockpit immediately." In first class, Laura froze mid-step, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. She turned and headed to the front, her confident smile still in place, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Back in economy, Maya heard the announcement, her stomach twisting with a mix of anticipation and dread. She didn't look back, but she knew something was shifting. The storm she'd felt brewing inside her was about to break. Moments later, Laura emerged from the cockpit, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. Captain Hayes had been clear. She was to apologize to Maya in front of the entire cabin and escort her back to seat 4B. If her rights were violated, this flight might not make it to Chicago as planned, he'd warned. Laura's mind raced as she made her way to the back of the plane, the aisle stretching endlessly before her. When she reached Maya's row, she crouched slightly, her voice measured but strained. "Lieutenant Carter, there's been a misunderstanding," she said, avoiding Maya's gaze. "I'd like to escort you back to your seat in first class." Maya turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Laura's. There was no anger in her expression, only a quiet, piercing strength that made Laura's throat tighten. "A misunderstanding?" Maya repeated, her voice soft but heavy with unspoken hurt. She didn't move, not yet. She typed a quick message to her father. "She's here, wants me to go back, says it was a misunderstanding," and waited. His reply came instantly. "Say what you feel. No excuses. Just the truth." Maya looked up at Laura, her voice steady, each word a weight. "You said I didn't belong. You touched me. And now you want to act like it didn't happen." The words hung in the air, a quiet indictment that echoed louder than any shout, as the cabin around them fell into a tense, heavy silence. The silence in the cabin was deafening, a heavy shroud that seemed to press against every passenger as Maya Carter's words lingered in the air. "You said I didn't belong. You touched me. And now you want to act like it didn't happen." Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken battles, each syllable a mirror reflecting Laura Bennett's actions back at her. Maya's eyes, steady and unyielding, bore into Laura, who stood frozen in the aisle, her clipboard trembling in her hands. The 28-year-old lieutenant sat in her cramped economy seat, her military uniform a stark contrast to the casual indifference of the passengers around her, but her presence now commanded the attention of the entire plane. The shame that had burned in her chest earlier had transformed into something else, quiet, resolute power that refused to be ignored. Laura's throat tightened, her face flushing with a mix of defensiveness and fear. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught like dry leaves in a storm. I, I apologize for the inconvenience, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, her usual authority crumbling under the weight of Maya's gaze. But Maya's expression didn't soften. She tilted her head slightly, her voice steady as steel. You didn't ask anyone else in first class for their ticket, just me. The accusation hung heavy, a truth that Laura couldn't deflect. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the two women. A woman in 12D lowered her magazine, her lips parting in a silent gasp. The businessman in 3C, who had earlier averted his gaze, now stared openly, his face a mask of guilt. The cabin, once filled with the mundane hum of pre-flight routines, now buzzed with a tension that felt almost tangible, as if the air itself had thickened with the gravity of what had unfolded. Laura straightened, her complexion paling as she forced the words out. I made a mistake, she admitted, her voice cracking, the admission a bitter pill she could no longer swallow back. I assumed, and I was wrong. Maya didn't respond immediately. She rose slowly, her movements deliberate, her backpack slung over one shoulder as she stepped into the aisle. She didn't thank Laura for the apology there was no gratitude to give. The harm had been done, etched into her memory like a scar that would never fully fade. With a quiet nod, she made her way back to seat 4B in first class, her steps steady, her chin held high. The passengers she passed now looked at her differently, some with guilt, others with a flicker of respect, but Maya didn't meet their gazes. She settled into her seat, tucking her backpack beneath it as she had before, and opened a small notebook on her lap, her fingers brushing against the pages as if seeking solace in their familiarity. Laura lingered for a moment, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, uncertainty etched into every line of her face. If there's anything I can do for you, she said, her voice faltering, please let me know. Maya didn't look up, her silence a louder rebuke than any words could have been. Laura turned, her face flushed, and walked back down the aisle, her steps lacking the confidence she'd once exuded. In the galley, Sarah, the younger flight attendant who had questioned Laura earlier, was waiting, her expression a mix of concern and disapproval. How'd that go? Sarah asked softly, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. I apologized, Laura muttered, her voice barely audible as she busied herself with the tray, though her hands shook. You look like you just walked out of a courtroom, Sarah observed, her words cutting through Laura's fragile composure. Laura shot her a glare, but there was no fire behind it. Not the time, Sarah, she snapped, though her voice trembled with the weight of her own guilt. The atmosphere on the flight had shifted irrevocably. First-class passengers who had once chatted lightly now sat in silence, their eyes darting toward Maya's seat with a mix of curiosity and unease. In economy, whispers rippled through the rows, passengers piecing together the story from hushed conversations. She's a soldier, a man in 15, a murmured to his wife. They made her move for no reason. The wife nodded, her expression troubled. That's not right, she whispered back, her voice tinged with regret for her earlier silence. Even those who hadn't witnessed the initial incident could feel the change, a quiet storm that had swept through the cabin, leaving behind a palpable sense of unease. Maya turned the pages of her notebook, though her eyes weren't focused on the words. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the moment Laura had touched her, the sting of being told she didn't belong, the deafening silence of the passengers who had watched it happen. But beneath that pain was a growing resolve, a fire kindled by the knowledge that her father was already working behind the scenes. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down to see a message from him. Stay seated. Security is waiting at the gate. A small, knowing smile tugged at her lips. She didn't reply. There was no need. Instead, she took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she turned her gaze to the window, the Chicago skyline now faintly visible in the distance. As the plane began its descent into O'Hare International Airport, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach. Please return to your seats and ensure your tray tables are in the upright position. The usual bustle followed, seatbelts clicking, blankets folding, but beneath the routine, a subtle anticipation lingered. Passengers could sense that this landing would be anything but ordinary. Maya remained still, her seatbelt already fastened, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The tension in her neck had eased, replaced by a quiet certainty. She wasn't just a passenger on this flight anymore, she was a catalyst, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. When the wheels touched down with a gentle thud, a few passengers clapped half-heartedly, the sound hollow in the tense atmosphere. The plane taxied to the gate, and the seatbelt sign turned off with a soft ding. But before anyone could rise, the cabin door opened with a sharp hiss, followed by the sound of footsteps. A tall man in a dark uniform entered, his badge gleaming on his chest, his expression unreadable. He ignored the passengers, his gaze fixed on Laura, who stood frozen in the galley, her face drained of color. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm but calm, "you'll need to come with us." A quiet gasp rippled through the cabin, and in that moment, every passenger understood. This flight had just become a reckoning, and the storm Maya had felt brewing was now breaking wide open. The executive lounge at O'Hare International Airport felt like a different world compared to the tense chaos of the flight Maya Carter had just endured. Soft lights glowed from sleek fixtures, the faint aroma of roasted coffee lingered in the air, and plush leather chairs dotted the space, offering a serenity that seemed almost surreal after the storm she'd weathered at 30,000 feet. But as Maya stepped through the frosted glass doors, her backpack slung over one shoulder, the weight of the past few hours clung to her like a shadow. At 28, she'd faced combat zones and led her unit through peril, but the sting of Laura Bennett's words, "You don't belong," and the humiliating nudge on her shoulder had pierced her in a way no battlefield ever could. Yet, as her eyes met her father's across the room, a quiet strength began to rise within her, a resolve to turn her pain into purpose. Colonel James Carter stood in the far corner of the lounge, his posture as commanding as ever, even in civilian clothes. A retired colonel now serving as a senior advisor on aviation security for the Department of Transportation, James carried the kind of presence that made people stand a little taller in his orbit. His graying hair and sharp eyes spoke of years of service, of decisions made under pressure, but when he saw Maya, his expression softened. He stood, opened his arms, and pulled her into a brief, firm embrace. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked, his voice low, steady, the kind of tone that had guided her through every challenge since childhood. Maya nodded slowly, her throat tight with emotion. "I'm okay now," she said, her voice soft but steady, though the ache in her chest told a different story. "It hurt, Dad, than I thought it would." James stepped back, searching her face for a moment, his jaw tightening as he saw the flicker of pain in her eyes. He gestured to the chair across from him, and Maya sat, placing her backpack beside her, her posture mirroring his straight, composed, a soldier through and through. A closed folder rested on the table between them, its edges worn, a testament to the work James had already begun. "I've seen the footage," he said, tapping the folder lightly with 2 fingers. "Passengers recorded it blurry, but enough to show what happened. It's already spreading online, Maya. Aviation channels are talking about it, and the media will catch wind within hours." Maya's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers tightening around the strap of her backpack. She wasn't surprised, but the thought of her humiliation going viral made her stomach churn, a mix of vulnerability and defiance swirling inside her. James opened the folder, sliding a printed email and a copy of her boarding pass across the table. Seat 4B, her name Lieutenant Maya Carter, clearly marked, all in black and white. "She didn't check anything," Maya said softly, her voice laced with a quiet anger that hadn't fully surfaced until now. "She just looked at me and decided I didn't fit." James nodded, his expression grim. The airline's already released a statement, trying to downplay it's some vague nonsense about reviewing procedures. "But we're not letting this slide." He leaned forward, his voice firm but measured. "This isn't just about a bad flight attendant or poor customer service. It's about judgment, disrespect, and discrimination. And it's about making sure no one else, soldier or nothus, to feel what you felt today." Maya's eyes met his, and for the first time since the incident, she felt a spark of hope, a sense that her pain could be a catalyst for something greater. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady, her resolve hardening. James slid a notepad toward her, his handwriting already filling the first page. "We're drafting a policy proposal for the Department of Transportation," he said. "Mandatory anti-bias training for all cabin crew, a system for passengers to report discrimination safely, and a public apology not just to you, but to every service member who's been disrespected like this." He paused, his gaze softening. "But I want your voice in this, Maya. You lived it. You shape it." For the next hour, they worked side by side, their pens moving in tandem as they outlined reforms with precision. Maya's contributions were clear and unflinching. Digital verification of tickets before any seat changes, second crew validation for removals, and protections for vulnerable passengers, military personnel, people of color, those traveling alone in premium seats. As she wrote, the hurt that had weighed her down began to transform into purpose, each word a step toward ensuring no one else would endure the silent humiliation she had. "They'll fight this," she said at one point, glancing at her father. "They'll try," he replied, a rare, steely glint in his eyes. "But they'll fail." Meanwhile, in a stark conference room at the airport, Laura Bennett sat alone, her hands clasped tightly on the table, her blazer still buttoned but offering no comfort. The preliminary notice from HR lay in front of her, suspended pending investigation, with termination a looming possibility. Her mind replayed the moment she'd touched Maya's shoulder, the cold certainty she'd felt in her judgment, and the way Maya's words had cut through her defenses. "You didn't ask anyone else in first class for their ticket." "Just me." Laura's chest tightened, a wave of regret crashing over her like a tidal wave. She'd convinced herself it was a routine call, a minor seat adjustment, but now, facing the consequences, she saw the truth. She'd let her biases dictate her actions, and it had cost her dearly. Back in the lounge, Maya's phone buzzed with a notification, a blurry video of her walking back to first class, shared by a passenger on social media, already amassing thousands of views. Comments flooded in. "She's a soldier, how could they do this? This is why we need change." Maya set the phone down, her expression unreadable, but inside, a fire burned. She wasn't seeking fame or revenge. She wanted accountability, a future where no one would be judged by the color of their skin or the uniform they wore. As she looked at her father, his steady presence, a rock amidst the chaos, she felt a quiet certainty take root. This wasn't the end of her story, it was the beginning of a fight for justice, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. The small conference room in downtown Chicago was far from glamorous, but as Maya Carter stepped onto the makeshift stage, the air crackled with anticipation. A modest crowd of journalists, veterans, and local activists filled the rows of folding chairs, their eyes fixed on the 28-year-old lieutenant who had become an unexpected symbol of resilience. Dressed in a simple navy blazer and jean snow uniform, no medals, Maya carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had seen her through the humiliation on that Delta flight from Atlanta. The memory of Laura Bennett's words, "You don't belong," still lingered, a dull ache in her chest. But as she adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd, that ache transformed into a fire. She wasn't here to seek revenge or fame. She was here to ensure that no one else would feel the sting of being dismissed the way she had. "I didn't come here to shame anyone," Maya began, her voice steady, each word deliberate, resonating with a strength that silenced the room. "I came because I was told I didn't belong on a flight I earned the right to be on, in a seat I was given by someone who believed in me. I had a valid ticket, and I wore a uniform I've risked my life for. That should have been enough. But it wasn't." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the raw emotion she'd held back for too long. "I was asked to move because of how I looked, because of someone's assumption about who I am. That's not a misunderstanding, it's a judgment, and it's a dangerous one. This happens too often, not just to soldiers, but to anyone who doesn't fit someone's idea of first-class black, brown, disabled, poor, quiet, or proud." The crowd leaned in, hanging on her every word, some nodding in silent agreement, others wiping away tears as her story struck a chord deep within them. Maya paused, her gaze sweeping the room, her heart pounding with a mix of vulnerability and resolve. "I'm speaking now, not just for myself, but for everyone who's been made to feel small and couldn't speak up. I don't want another apology, gotten one. I want accountability. I want the next flight attendant who sees someone like me to check their biases before they check my boarding pass. I belong. We all do. And no seat number can change that. The room erupted in applause, not the polite kind, but a swell of genuine emotion that echoed the impact of her words. Maya stood tall, her expression composed. But inside, a weight lifted, a quiet victory in knowing her voice had finally been heard. Her speech went viral within hours, the clip amassing millions of views across social media platforms. Veterans shared it with captions like, "This is why we fight for respect," not just on the battlefield. Civil rights groups reposted it, calling for systemic change. Passengers who had been on the flight chimed in, some admitting their regret for staying silent, others praising Maya's grace under pressure. Messages flooded her inbox, hundreds from strangers who felt seen through her story. A 60-year-old nurse wrote, "I was asked to prove my first-class ticket on a flight last year. I felt so small, but you've given me courage." A young Black student shared, "I want to be a pilot one day, and you've shown me I don't have to let anyone tell me I can't." Each message was a thread in a tapestry of change, weaving Maya's personal pain into a broader movement for justice. Back in Atlanta, Laura Bennett's life had taken a stark turn. She'd been terminated from Delta after the investigation, her career of 15 years reduced to a single, irreversible mistake. Sitting in a small community center where she now volunteered, Laura looked different, her hair loose, her posture softened, her eyes carrying the weight of regret. She worked with kids from underprivileged neighborhoods, teaching them about aviation, about dreaming big. One day, a 10-year-old boy pointed to a photo of Maya on his phone, his eyes bright with admiration. "She's a soldier! I want to be a pilot because of her." Laura's heart sank, the memory of her actions on that flight a bitter pill she swallowed daily. She wrote Maya a note that evening, her handwriting shaky but sincere. "I lost my job, and I deserved it. I'm volunteering now, trying to make amends. One of the kids here wants to be a pilot because of you. I'll never forget what I did, but I'm working to be better. I'm so sorry." She left the note with the center's manager, knowing she might never get a response, but hoping her small act of change might mean something. Maya's impact didn't stop at personal stories. The policy proposal she and her father, Colonel James Carter, had drafted gained traction, backed by advocacy groups and national media attention. Within weeks, the Department of Transportation announced new mandates: anti-bias training for all airline staff, digital ticket verification protocols, and a transparent system for reporting discrimination. Delta issued a public apology to military personnel, acknowledging systemic failures. Maya's unit honored her with a citation for civic bravery, a recognition that made her smile softly as her commanding officer teased, "You stood up on a plane, Carter. That's a new kind of battle." She accepted the honor with quiet grace, knowing her fight had ripple effects far beyond her own story. Months later, on her next flight, Maya boarded in jeans and a t-shirt, her uniform tucked away, her boarding pass for seat 2A clutched in her hand. The gate agent greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter. Enjoy your flight." There were no lingering looks, no questions, just respect. As she settled into her seat, gazing out at the tarmac, a gentle peace settled over her. The hurt from that day on the flight from Atlanta hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined her. She had turned it into a legacy of dignity, accountability, and the unshakable truth that everyone belongs. As the golden hues of a Chicago sunset filtered through the window of her modest apartment, Maya Carter sat at her desk, her journal open to a blank page, her pen hovering over the paper. The past few months had been a whirlwind. A single moment of injustice on a flight had spiraled into a movement that reshaped policies, shifted perspectives, and touched lives far beyond her own. At 28, Maya had seen the raw edges of humanity, both in the deserts of the Middle East and in the sterile confines of a first-class cabin. But sitting here now, with the echoes of her viral speech still resonating in her mind, she felt a profound clarity, a clarity born from the pain of being told she didn't belong and the power of proving that she did. Her journey had been one of hurt, resilience, and ultimately, transformation. And as she began to write, her words poured out like a river finding its course. When I was asked to leave my seat on that flight, I felt invisible, Maya wrote, her handwriting steady but her heart heavy with the memory. I felt the weight of every stereotype, every assumption, every glance that had ever made me question my worth not just as a soldier, but as a black woman, as a person. I could have let that moment break me. I could have shouted or cried or walked away and buried the hurt, but I didn't. I stayed calm, not because I wasn't angry, but because I knew my dignity wasn't theirs to take. I spoke up, not for myself alone, but for every person who's been made to feel small, who's been told they don't belong, whether on a plane, in a classroom, or in their own skin. That day, I learned that true strength isn't in how loudly you fight, but in how deeply you believe in your own worth, and how fiercely you protect the worth of others. Her pen paused, her gaze drifting to a framed citation on the wall, the Civic Bravery Award from her unit, a reminder of the impact she'd made. The hurt from that day on the flight hadn't vanished entirely. It lingered like a faint scar, a reminder of the battle she'd fought not with weapons, but with words and resolve. But that scar didn't define her, it empowered her. Turning her pain into action had been her way of reclaiming her dignity, of ensuring that the next soldier, the next black woman, the next quiet passenger in first class wouldn't face the same humiliation. The policies she and her father had fought for, anti-bias training, transparent ticketing, safe reporting systems, were now in place, a tangible legacy of her courage. But for Maya, the real victory wasn't in the policies themselves. It was in the stories she'd heard, the messages from strangers who felt seen, who found their own voices because of hers. Reflecting on Laura Bennett's journey, Maya felt a flicker of compassion. She'd received Laura's note through the community center, its shaky handwriting a testament to the flight attendant's regret. Maya didn't reply, she wasn't ready to, but she didn't resent Laura anymore. She saw a woman who had made a grave mistake, lost everything, and was now trying to rebuild, one small act of kindness at a time. That, too, was a lesson. Change was possible, even for those who had caused harm, if they were willing to face their own biases and grow. Maya closed her journal, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She had turned her pain into purpose, her silence into a roar, and in doing so, she'd reminded the world that belonging isn't a privilege to be granted, it's a right to be defended. The broader lesson of Maya's story is a universal one. Dignity matters, and it starts with us. We all carry biases, whether we admit it or not, but we also carry the power to challenge them, to question our assumptions, to speak up when we see injustice, to stand with those who are told they don't belong. Maya's journey teaches us that true change begins with a single voice, a single act of courage, a single refusal to stay silent. It's a reminder that our worth isn't determined by the seats we occupy, but by the values we uphold, the battles we fight for others, and the communities we build through empathy and action. Maya Carter's story isn't just a tale of one flight, it's a testament to the unshakable value of dignity, the power of standing tall, and the ripple effect of a single voice demanding change. It's a story that reminds us all to look inward, to challenge our own biases, and to create a world where everyone belongs, whether in first class, in a classroom, or in the spaces we call home. Her courage moved mountains, but the work isn't done. What biases can you confront today? Who can you stand up for tomorrow? If Maya's journey touched your heart, let's keep this conversation alive. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of dignity. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences, we'd love to hear them. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. Together, we can build a future where every voice matters and every seat is earned with respect. See you in the next video. Let's keep pushing for a better tomorrow.